What's good, guys? Prince Sports here. I thought I'd do another conversation on my greatest draft classes of all time in the NBA and why. I'm going to start from 3 to 1. All right, so that number 3 is 1996 draft class. Okay, this draft class had arguably the most Hall of Famers than most draft classes in NBA history. You had Kobe, Ray Allen, Allen Iverson, Steve Nash. Oh my God, it was so talented. Okay, this was one of the most stacked draft classes of all time. My only problem with this draft class was it was 1996. So it came in when the 90s was almost over. We're talking about basically what, 3 more years and the 90s would be over? You know, because look, from 1990 to 1999, that's the end of the 90s, all right? Key word, 90s. All right, so with only 3 seasons left, those guys didn't really have a chance to make a seriously impact on that decade. So we could say, oh, this era had 2 decades in one. But nevertheless, the 90s was special in very other ways because it had a fluctuation of great talent. I mean, you still had the Jason Kidd and Grant Hill draft class. Grant Hill was nasty with it. So was Jason Kidd, one of the greatest point guards of all time. But imagine if this 1996 draft class was in 1993. All right? Let's just say that. Do you know the classic battles we would have gotten between Kobe and Michael Jordan? They would have had almost 7 years to play against each other. Oh, that would have been must-see TV. You know, and let's assume Kobe got drafted by the Charlotte Hornets, right? He would have been playing with, like, Alonzo Mourning, Larry Johnson. Oh, my God. Just imagine that team, bro. You know, woo, that'd have been great. And you get to see the present and the future all in one. And, you know, the players that went on to define the 2000s, most of them were drafted in 1996. But it was so late, it kind of affected the 2000s because their game couldn't develop as much in the 90s because they was drafted too late. So that's why it's at number 3 for me. Number 2 is 2003 draft class. Now you say, hey, this could be probably ranked higher because it's 2003. It's dead smack in the middle of the 2000s, meaning Wade, Melo, and LeBron was able to go up against Tim Duncan, Kobe Bryant, and Shaq, all while they were still in their primes. So you have 2 split generations. The next generation that will go on to define the 2010s, but at the same time, those guys were still able to play 7 seasons of the 2000s. That's amazing. That's big. But the problem was the draft class itself. You had Wade, LeBron, and Carmelo Anthony, and that's where it pretty much ends. Everybody else was you know. So, oh, of course, you had Chris Bosh. You know, so, yeah, it was a good draft class, but outside of those 4 guys, you start to hit a little bit roadblocks, you know. So that's why it's at number 2. But number 1, the greatest draft class in NBA history was none other than 1984, right? Dead smack in the middle, dead smack in the 80s. You got to see the next generation that will go on to define the 90s right there, dead smack in the 80s. So you had 2 split generations competing in one. And at the same time, some of the greatest teams in NBA history, some of the greatest players in NBA history, all beating the crap out of each other, trying to be number 1, trying to be the best player to ever pick up a basketball. That's how special the 80s was, all right? It was fluctuating with talent, from the Bernard Kings to Moses Malones, all right? The in-prime players to the young players like Jordan, Charles Barkley, Hakeem Olajuwon, and hell, Sam Bowie, okay? Shit, Sam Bowie, dog. If he could have been a non-bust, he'd have been added to this list, you know, but nevertheless, he was bust, you know, so, but that draft class was really good, man. That was a great draft pick, you know, and a lot of those guys went on to define that era, you know, and as the later years went on, you still got the, you know, the Scottie Pippins, you know, 1987, but he missed the whole 80s, basically. It was pretty much Michael Jordan by himself for that whole decade, you know, with what he describes as a bunch of cokeheads. You know what I mean? I still can't get that out of my head. That's still funny within itself. But those are my top 3 draft classes that define and reshape the whole NBA for me. What about you? What's your top 3 draft classes? Did I miss out one? Or are you on par with me? Are you agreeing with me? Prince Sports out. Peace.